2020 news, where the news is
responsible and professional.
And the newscasters are
responsible and professional.
With Alex Kack.
And Rich Aguirre. It's Monday, April 17th, and we're coming to you live from the Creative Tucson studio in downtown Tucson. First, let's talk local headlines.
The national opinion on marijuana has undoubtedly shifted over the last few years, but nowhere is that more evident than in Chino Valley, Arizona. Corey Mendoza has served in Chino Valley's town council for the last 4 years. And for the majority of his tenure, Mendoza has been an outspoken critic of marijuana and the state's medical marijuana program. But he's had a change of heart, stating, quote, "I've gotten much more educated in the uses of marijuana." Mendoza told the town's Planning and Zoning Commission last week while he was asking for a permit to open a medical marijuana research facility on a 2.7-acre vacant lot that he owns. Quote, "I've softened a bit." Now that seems like a bit of an understatement. There are those in Chino Valley who say that Corey Mendoza's heart grew 3 sizes that day. The commissioners voted to recommend the city council to approve his permit with some added caveats on the facility's security measures and the requirement that all non-medical marijuana be destroyed. If you're listening, counselor, the best way to destroy non-medical marijuana is to dry it out and burn it, preferably in an enclosed space while you take deep breaths and listen to Pink Floyd. Just be careful with open flames around that glorious mustache of yours.
Firebirds restaurant at La Encantada Mall was the site of a murder-suicide Friday night. According to Pima County Sheriff's Department, Tucson Fire Department Captain Frederick Blair fatally shot 65-year-old Elliot Cobb and critically wounded his ex-wife Mary Jo Blair before turning the gun on himself. The crowded restaurant erupted into chaos as the 24-year-old veteran of the Tucson Fire Department fired an estimated 10 shots. Surprisingly, no other injuries were reported. Blair's motives are yet to be determined, but it should be noted that the shooting took place the day after the funeral services of his younger brother. In a news release, department spokesman Captain Barrett Baker stated the following. The Tucson Fire Department is heartbroken over the news regarding the shooting at La Encantada that occurred Friday night. The department extends its thoughts and prayers to the families of this tragic event.
Tucson water officials say the 22-year-old treatment plant on the south side is now unnecessary. Tucson's water woes began in the 1950s when area war profiteers began dumping an industrial degreaser containing the carcinogen trichloroethylene, or TCE, into unlined wells and directly into the soil. This contaminated the water supply for the lower income and predominantly Hispanic Southside community until those responsible were forced to begin a cleanup effort back in 1983. Studies link long-term exposure to TCE to several forms of cancer, including kidney, liver, and blood, as well as the autoimmune disease scleroderma and various sexual dysfunctions. When the treatment plant was built in 1994, the adverse health effects of the carcinogen 1,4-dioxane weren't as well documented, so the plant wasn't designed to remove it from the drinking water. Tucson Water built the Advanced Oxidation Plant in 2014 to target both TCE and 1,4-dioxane, as well as other known contaminants. The old plant continues to operate due to the legal obligation of those responsible for the pollution. But according to Tucson Water's Administrator of Strategic Initiatives, quote, "It's redundant now, and it's costing money unnecessarily." The EPA is laying out plans that would allow for the closure of the older treatment plant. But this is Trump's gutted, anti-science, pro-pollution EPA we're talking about. Guys, saving money is nice, but not having cancer is nicer.
On Saturday, over 1,000 people crowded the streets outside of Senator McCain's office demanding Trump release his taxes. This was part of the nationwide tax march. The Tucson demonstration was organized by Indivisible Southern Arizona, a local subset of the Indivisible Project. The Indivisible Project is a nonprofit organization focused on encouraging citizens to hold their congressional representatives accountable and defeating the Trump agenda. From all accounts, this was a peaceful protest with no arrests reported and no altercations with pro-Trump groups. The same can't be said of all the rallies held on Saturday. More on that later in the show. Trump took to Twitter the following day to downplay the obvious interest in his tax returns and brag about his big win in the election. You know, standard Trump stuff. A subsequent tweet called for an investigation into who paid for the, quote, small organized rallies, an apparent echo of the popular alt-right conspiracy theory that claims that all anti-Trump protests are funded by George Soros. According to taxmarch.com, 120,000 people attended these small organized rallies, including an estimated 25,000 at the White House. While there are no laws requiring presidents to reveal their tax returns, every other president in the last 40 years has done so voluntarily. The last president who refused to release their tax returns? Richard Nixon. If you missed your chance to protest on Saturday, don't worry. There will be other opportunities to do so throughout the week. Indivisible Southern Arizona has scheduled a demonstration outside Congresswoman Martha McSally's office at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, consisting of a miniature art installation and a call for transparency into her stance on key issues. And on Earth Day this coming Saturday, there will be a worldwide March for Science. More on that later in the week.
More than 4 out of 10 adults in Arizona know someone who is or has been addicted to prescription painkillers. According to a poll by Cronkite News, the poll showed that 44.8% knew someone addicted to painkillers out of a survey sample of 800 randomly selected people. The survey was conducted from March 11th to the 18th in Spanish and English. Over 58% of participants also said that prescription opioids were, quote, somewhat easy or easy to access. Kim Humphrey, who chairs the board at Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, said that the results are not surprising. She says that 2 of her children became addicted to painkillers, even though they were both high achievers who grew up in a religious household. Humphrey says that they were the least likely people to try drugs and shows that addiction does not discriminate. But the survey also shows that public perceptions of prescription meds are becoming more accurate. Over 54% said that they think the risk levels of heroin and prescription painkillers are about equal. This number was higher among younger people. Over 70% of those 18 to 35 said that it was more likely that painkiller abuse leads to heroin. This was compared to just 54% of those aged 36 to 64. The poll was conducted with a grant from the DEA and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. After hearing the poll results, Attorney General Jeff Sessions said that this proves the need to crack down on marijuana possession. A Justice Department official then had to explain to Sessions that marijuana and heroin, not the same thing.
And I wanted to take a moment to talk about the program you're watching right now. Here at 5 on 20 News, we are undertaking a new kind of citizen journalism. We're going to give you the news as we see it, and we want more people to speak up with us. We need writers, hosts, anchors, camera people, sound people, the whole gamut. The times require a new way of informing ourselves, so join us. Do it. Do it now. Email us at info@creativetucson.org to get involved. And if you think there's a story we're missing, a person we should interview, an upcoming event we should cover, or have any news tips for us, shoot us an email at info@creativetucson.org. We are here for you, and we want to cover all stories from all points of views. So don't be strangers.
And now in national and international news. The tax march saw thousands gathered outside Trump's primary residence at Mar-a-Lago, his home away from home at the White House, and in 200 cities across the country on Saturday. But it was a pro-Trump rally in Berkeley that turned violent. The alt-right-led Patriots Day rally met with anti-fascist counter-protesters, and things got out of control. Both sides came to Berkeley Park ready for a fight. Many members of the alt-right came equipped with based sticks, their term for heavy-duty flagpoles that are often used for bludgeoning people they don't agree with. The anti-fascists came armed with skateboards, smoke bombs, and pepper spray. There's been a lot of finger-pointing and speculation as to who struck first, but when the dust settled, 250 cops were on the scene, and 21 people had been arrested, including some for suspicion of assault with a deadly weapon. 11 people were injured in the skirmish, with at least 6 requiring hospitalization, including one person who had been stabbed. Now, this is the 3rd straight month of violent alt-right and anti-fascist altercations in Berkeley. The first, in February, came as the result of a scheduled and later canceled Milo Yiannopoulos appearance at UC Berkeley. March 4th saw a March for Trump rally devolve into a gang war that saw 10 people arrested. Now, given the frequency of violent confrontations in Berkeley, both sides should remember the words of Martin Luther King Jr. Through violence you may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie, nor establish the truth. Through violence, you may murder the hater, but you do not murder the hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate.
Saturday was the Day of the Sun in North Korea. The Day of the Sun is an annual celebration of North Korean founder Kim Il-sung's birthday. North Korea marks the occasion with a military parade and a visit to Il-sung's mausoleum. According to North Korean folklore, if Il-sung's ghost is frightened by his shadow, then the country's military dictatorship will continue another year. Spoiler alert, Il-sung's ghost is always frightened by his shadow. Kim Jong-un had a special surprise plan for this year's celebration. Knowing that Vice President Mike Pence was in South Korea visiting the United States troops and trying soul food for the first time, Jong-un decided he would prove his country's military might with a test fire of one of his big, beautiful missiles. No word on yet the quality or the flavor of the cake he was eating when he came to this decision. The United States had warned North Korea that continued tests on their intercontinental ballistic missile system and advancement for their nuclear program could lead to military intervention. Last weekend, United States aircraft carriers capable of shooting down North Korea missiles were dispatched to the region. Their presence was not necessary. The missile blew up almost immediately after launch. Jong-un was understandably embarrassed by the incident. He tried to explain that this sort of thing never happens to him, and he asked if he could try again in a few minutes, but the moment had passed. There was no mention of failed missile launch on North Korean state TV. According to the United States Defense Secretary James Mattis, quote, "The president and his military team are aware of North Korea's most recent unsuccessful missile launch. The president has no further comment." Trump having no further comment on something is probably the biggest insult he can deliver.
A fugitive Mexican governor was arrested in Guatemala over the weekend. Javier Duarte, the former governor of Veracruz, was forced to resign last year after being suspected of corruption, involvement in organized crime, and embezzlement of at least 645 million pesos, the equivalent of $35 million of public money. Duarte was a member of Mexico's Revolutionary Party, known in the country as the Partido Revolucionario Instruccional, or PRI, before being suspended from the party when his crimes came to light. PRI is also the political party of current Mexican President Enrique Nieto. Veracruz became the most dangerous region in the country under Duarte's reign. A total of 17 journalists were killed in his state while he was in office. Duarte had been in hiding since October of 2016 until a joint operation between Interpol and the Guatemalan police captured the former governor in a hotel lobby in the city of Sololo. Duarte is expected to be extradited to Mexico at a later date.
On Thursday, the UC Davis Student Synod voted to no longer require the American flag to be flown during its meetings. The controversial decision has divided the campus, with many on the right calling this an apparent attack on the flag and an attack on everything the flag stands for. To some on the left, the flag has come to stand for unfettered capitalism, imperialism, and perpetual warfare. That's not how college Republican spokeswoman Deborah Porter sees it. Quote, "The flag of the United States of America stands for the educational opportunity provided by America, as well as the sacrifice of our military soldiers and veterans to provide us with freedom." The Republican definition of freedom apparently doesn't include the right to choose whether or not to display the American flag. It's understandable Republicans have never been big on the right to choose. The UC Davis administration wants no part of the controversy. They say it's strictly a student matter and will make no further comment.
A recent report shows that Americans with disabilities are still having trouble finding treatment. The study, which was published in the Journal of Psychiatric Services, also shows that the Affordable Care Act has been unable to stave off the psychological impact of the 2008 recession. Following the recession, there was an explosion of people needing mental health care as people were pushed to the edge after the mass layoffs that occurred during that time. Over 8.3 million people have serious psychological distress, or SPD, which means that mental health problems interfere with people's lives. In 2014, when the ACA was fully implemented, 9.5 Americans with SPD didn't have access to health insurance. This was a rise from 2006, when 9% didn't have access. Judith Weissman, a research manager at NYU and one of the authors of the study, said that, quote, "There is something very broken about the way we provide mental health care in our country." She said that the data suggests that those with SPD experienced a lack of coverage following the recession, and haven't been able to bounce back. This means that those with mental health problems didn't experience the same type of recovery that those without SPD. For example, from 2006 to 2014, adults with SPD increasingly could not afford medication, which further hinders their recovery. The study also didn't include the homeless population, which would make these numbers even higher. It's been shown by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration that 1 in 5 experiencing homelessness have a serious mental health illness. And upon hearing about the report, the Trump administration said the Republican ACA replacement would solve these problems by not keeping track of those with mental health problems.
Over 1,000 Palestinians held in Israeli jails began a mass hunger strike today to protest their prison conditions. The hunger strike is led by Marwan Barghouti, a Palestinian leader who was jailed for 5 murders. Before his imprisonment, Barghouti was touted as a possible successor to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Protesters are supporting the prisoners in the West Bank as youth clashed with Israeli police in Bethlehem earlier today. The hunger strike comes at an especially tense time for Israeli-Palestine relations, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has agreed to expand settlements further into the West Bank. People in the area fear that the hunger strike could raise tensions even further. The strike also comes on Palestinian Prisoners' Day, where Palestinians remember friends and relatives that are detained by the Israeli government. Palestinians regard these detainees as political prisoners, while Israel says that they were convicted of attacks against Israeli police along with other offenses. As of last year, there were about 7,000 Palestinian and Israeli prisons to try to break the hunger strikes. To try to break the hunger strikes, Netanyahu has encouraged Israeli chefs to open restaurants inside the prisons. If nothing else, Netanyahu hopes that the prison eateries will become the next food trend in the country.
A dictatorship is becoming more of a reality in Turkey, as President Recep Tayyip Erdogan won a referendum that expands his power. Erdogan won on Sunday with over 51% approving of a plan that replaces the country's parliamentary system with a handsome guy named Recep Erdogan. Turkey's 2 main opposition parties have already said that they'll contest the vote, with the country's Republican People's Party demanding a recount of 60% of the votes. They criticized the decision by the government to accept ballots that weren't officially stamped as valid unless proven otherwise. Erdogan's supporters took to the streets in excitement, but so did the opponents, who banged pots and pans in protest. 3 people were shot and killed near a polling station in southeastern Turkey, in response to the European Commission called on Turkey to seek, quote, the broadest possible national consensus when changing the constitution. They certainly got broad. In his victory speech, Erdogan proposed another constitutional change that would reinstate the death penalty. This would violate EU rules and end any discussion of Turkey entering the EU. Before the changes, the Turkish presidency was mostly a ceremonial role. But since Erdogan became president in 2014, after serving as prime minister for 10 years, things done changed. But Erdogan says that the change moves the country more towards a system similar to France and the United States, who both feature a strong executive branch. He says that the increase in power will help him deal with the country's issues with ISIS and with Kurdish insurgency. Critics say that Erdogan is slowly developing a dictatorship. They point to the over 100,000 people who have been fired or suspended from government positions following a failed coup last July. But Erdogan tried to calm the criticism in his farewell speech, announcing that the move will empower the Turkish people. The speech may have gotten a better reception if Erdogan hadn't been standing on a pile of his political opponents. This was Alex Kack.
And Rich Aguirre for 5 on 20 News. Things done changed.
Things done changed.
Hey, come to my improv show on Saturday night at Tucson Improv Movement. Follow me at The Real Rich Gary.
We'll see you tomorrow.
We finished it. Follow me at The Real Rich Gary. Check out my YouTube.